Alright, let's look at Standard 14, Substandard A. Explain the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and anti-Asian immigration sentiment on the West Coast. Okay. So let's look at a timeline real quick first. Chinese started coming into the country in 1849, or 1850, excuse me. The gold was discovered in Sutter's Mill, and the gold rush happened in California. And then 1850, California became a state with the compromise. 1850, a free state. In 1850, 450 Chinese were lured to the United States to help. 2,700 by 1851 had come, and then they increased to 20,000 by 1852. And then in 1860, at the time of the Civil War, 34,900 were coming to the United States. And then the building of the Transcontinental Railroad after the Civil War resulted in 1,200 Chinese dying. And then by 1870, 63,100 Chinese were in the United States. And in the 1870s, Chinese were hired over whites because they were harder workers, worked for very little wages. And it's during this time period where people start getting upset because jobs are being diminished for whites, and the Chinese are driving wages down because business owners know they can pay them less and get by with it. Supreme Order of Caucasians was a group dedicated to getting the Chinese out of California. Was created by 1876. Then by 1882, Chinese Exclusion Act is going to be passed. California passes anti-Chinese provisions, and this law is in 1879. California law in 1862 passed called the Anti-Coolie Act, and a coolie was a derogatory name given to Asians. Okay. An act to protect free white labor against competition with Chinese coolie labor, and to discourage the immigration of the Chinese into the state of California. So here we see a conflict over labor. You know, these free white labor people didn't want the Chinese taking their jobs and driving wages down. So here's a law passed in 1862 during the Civil War in California. Alright, then we have this group, over 5,000 members, 64 chapters throughout California, and their primary goal and purpose was to run the Chinese out of the United States. And they were formed in Sacramento, California in 1876. Look at this cartoon here. After the 1876 provisions were changed, it says around this Chinese caricature, this stereotypical racist drawing here, it says cheap labor. And then it says California down here. There's the bear here. Won't they still remain here in spite of the adoption of the new Constitution? Political thieves, rings, hard times. Alright, so this shows you that there's this monopoly capital grabbers of labor using these Chinese, and the working man's down here trying to get these Chinese kicked out. This shows that there was conflict over labor in California, and this ought to bring home why there was anti-Asian sentiment. Okay. Dennis Kearney was the president of the Working Man's Party in California in 1877. Here's his quote: "The Central Pacific men are thieves and will soon feel the power of the working men. The Chinamen must go. If they don't, by the eternal, we will take them by the throat, squeeze their breath out, and throw them into the sea. The Chinese must go. They are stealing our jobs." So this was the main thing. It was over about labor. It's about the Chinese stealing jobs, driving wages down. Here's one of the working men's tickets that shows Working Men's Party of California. And there's California, there's Pacific Ocean. Shows them kicking them in the butt and kicking them out into the ocean. Chinese must go. Santa Cruz County, California. So we can learn 4 things about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. First, it was the first law in the United States to exclude a group of people from America just because of their ethnic background, Chinese. And second, the act prohibited the immigration of Chinese to the United States of America. Third, working class Americans who felt that Chinese took jobs, these working class felt the Chinese took jobs and lowered wages, and they strongly supported this Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And then lastly, support of the law was particularly strong in California and on the western coast of the United States, where most of the Chinese were. Okay, the Chinese Exclusion Act here is a political cartoon showing that they were being kept out. They couldn't come into the country. They were being excluded from immigration into the United States. It's not going to be repealed until 1943. Here's a cartoon showing, here's Uncle Sam here. Here's the working man. And here's the Chinese individual or stereotype over here, and he eats Uncle Sam and the working man down here at the bottom in this 1, 2, 3 cartoon here. And then here's one, Gates of Liberty into the United States, and here's this Chinaman here, can't come in because it says he's not welcome. And then here's one, why they can live on 40 cents a day. It shows them all racked up in this thing here, and this is, and they can't. It shows some of the working men coming in, their families waiting for them to feed them. So you can see the conflict in these cartoons, and you can also see the negative stereotypes about Chinamen, that they were filthy, immoral, had diseases, ruined the place, white labor, and ruined America. See this statue of whatever, stereotypical racism is what it is. But anyway, Chinese immigration from 1864 to 1894, you see in 1882 here on this thing, what happens to Chinese immigration. We see it going up from 1864 all the way up to 1882, and we see what happens. So the Chinese Exclusion Act causes deep decrease. But see, before 1882, you see a sharp increase because they were needed for labor reasons. For mining gold out in California, for farming in California, for factory labor in California, the gold rush and all that. The building of the Transcontinental Railroad, it's a sharp increase, but in 1882, a sharp decrease. Same thing happens for Japanese immigration, 1905. Okay, it's going to be in effect until the Magnuson Act of 1942, and this act is going to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act, and they're going to be permitted in, and Chinese immigrants who are already here are going to be naturalized citizens. It was passed on December 17th, 1943, the year China became an official allied nation to the United States in World War II. If you recall, in 41, December 7th, 1941, was when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. So now we need the Chinese as allies. We passed this act to get their friendly allied disposition. So looks like there might have been some ulterior motive there. But anyway, it was passed. Then in 2012, June 8, 2012, Representative Judy Chu from California, a Democrat, pushed through the House of Representatives an apologetic legislation saying that the United States House of Representatives made a mistake and was sorry for passing the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Her grandfather was injured by this act, and it says, "It is my grandfather and for all Chinese Americans that we must pass this resolution. For those who were told for 6 decades by the U.S. government that the land of the free wasn't open to them, we must finally and formally acknowledge that these ugly laws that were incompatible with America's founding principles." In 2011, the Senate had passed an apologetic resolution, and in California in 2009 one had been passed as well. So this is the history of this Chinese Exclusion Act, and what we were supposed to do with it is explain the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, anti-Asian immigration sentiment on the West Coast. I think we've done that. The impact of it here, showing them this graph, is extremely important, that it rose tremendously from 1850 to about 1880 because we needed their labor, and then 1882, because of this law, it drops tremendously. Okay. If you have any questions, ask them in class. Raise your hand. Good luck on the quiz, the test, and the EOCT.